Hi, I'm Cheryl and welcome to the Sewing Room channel. I've got a great beginner's quilt project for you, and that is a checkerboard quilt. This one is really easy. You can cut your squares any size that you like, real small or really big. You need to make sure you select a light and a dark fabric, or a print and a solid fabric. But this, what looks like a solid fabric, is actually a very small print. So you want to make sure that there's a sharp contrast between the fabrics, before you purchase. All of the supplies are listed below, and the supplies are for a 48 by 48 quilt size. Now, if you want to make it bigger, you just cut more squares. Okay, let's get started. I'm going to go over your cutting instructions. Now, the instructions I'm giving you are for using a rotary cutter and a rotary cutting mat. So you want to make sure that when you lay your fabric out, you have it folded with your selvage edges together. It's just like it is when you purchased it off of the bolt of fabric. So lay it out on top of your cutting mat and align the fabric on one of the lines on the cutting mat so you know that everything's straight. Cut this raw edge straight and then place your ruler over 6.5 inches and cut a strip. Move it again and cut, and again. So for this particular quilt that I've made this size, you're going to cut 3 strips. So they're 6.5 inches wide, and it's probably around 21 inches this way. Then take these strips, and if you're only got a few, you can just stack them on top of each other. Make sure they're nice and even. Cut your selvage edges off, and again, use the lines on your cutting mat when you're moving your ruler. Move it over 6.5 inches and cut, and then 2 more times, and then cut. Now I'm just going to demonstrate a little small layout so you understand how your pieces are to be placed. Start with either your dark or your light fabric, it doesn't matter, and just placing every other one across. Remember, if you're going to make it bigger, you just keep going till you get it to the size that you want. Then when you do your second row, you want to make sure that they're opposite of each other like this. So you just keep going till you got it all laid out the way you like it. Then to stitch your pieces together, you bring them front sides together and stitch 1/4 inch. And you continue adding them on till you have all the pieces in your first row stitched together. Then go to your second row and do the same thing, and continue until you have them, all your rows stitched together. Then take all of your rows to your ironing board. I like to press my seams on the back because it relaxes the stitches so everything lays nice and flat. Then press your seams on top. And as you're pressing, you want to keep in mind that every other row, the seams are going to go in the opposite direction. And one of the quickest ways I can think of to press your seams really quick is at your ironing board, hold one end of your strip up. Take your iron and push against the seams and just keep going along until your row is all pressed, going in the correct direction. Now stitch your rows together. So bring front sides together of your rows, and you want to make sure your seams are going in the opposite direction. So just make sure you look at the back side and then on top. Press on it, and if it feels nice and flat, it's usually locked in there in the correct position. If it feels lumpy and bumpy, you need to check it out because it's probably not lined up. Then place straight pins at all of the seams so that they don't shift while you are stitching. Then do a 1/4 inch seam all the way across. Then press your seam on the back and then unfold and press it on top. And again, I like to just press my seams all in one direction, keeps it all nice and neat, so when you go to do your quilting stitches, everything is laying very flat. So after you've got it all stitched together, make sure you give it a really good pressing so everything is nice and flat. This is what it should look like on the front, and here is what a quilt top looks like on the back. Now it's time to layer your quilt. Your fabric for the very back of the quilt, you want to make sure that your fabric and the cotton batting are cut larger than your quilt top, because when you do your quilting stitches, the fabric may stretch and shift, so you don't want it cut to the exact size of your quilt top just yet. Take your fabric for the back and place the front side of it down. So now you're looking at the back of it. Take your cotton batting and place it on top. Then place your quilt top over that with the pretty side facing up. And you'll notice I have my cotton batting and fabric for the back are extending out past all of the edges. Make sure all of your layers are very smooth. Then scatter safety pins all over the top, because you want to make sure those layers stay together. Then you're going to do your quilting stitches, and those are used to hold all your layers together. One of the easiest ways to do your quilting stitches is just to do stitch in the ditch. The ditch is where two pieces of fabric come together, and you just stitch right in there all the way across. Then you would turn your quilt and do your stitches going this way in the ditch. Now let's take a look at some other suggested quilt stitch patterns. Some other quilt stitch patterns that I often use is just stitching straight lines 2 to 3 inches apart, and I just keep going across the quilt. I just sort of ignore the ditch area. I'm just following a certain number of spaces in between, and I try to keep it evenly consistent. So you just go across your quilt in one direction, then you turn your quilt and continue going in the opposite direction. You can also do corner to corner, and then when you get done, you turn it and go corner to corner, going in the opposite direction. One of my favorite quilting stitches is the serpentine stitch, and all computerized sewing machines have this stitch on there. So just make sure you test that stitch out to where you get it to the length and width that you like. And again, you can do it 2 to 3 inches apart, going across one direction, turn your quilt, and then go across the other direction. You can also do the serpentine stitch on a diagonal and then turn it and go in the opposite direction. Now let's take a look at what I did on my checkerboard quilt. On this quilt, I did not do any stitching over the seams. I stayed with inside of the squares. So I went over about 2 inches and did a row of stitching all the way down to the other edge. Then I went over again about maybe 2.5 inches and went all the way down to the other edge. Then once I was done going across the quilt, I turned the quilt and then repeated the pattern going this way. Now let's look at the back of the quilt. When you look at the back of the quilt, you can see a definite pattern. 2 of the lines are kind of close together. Then there's a little bit more room in the next section. Then 2 lines are a little bit closer together. So you can create whatever stitch pattern you want to do. Just make sure it's consistent throughout the quilt. One of my favorite presser feet is the walking foot. This is great for doing quilting stitches because it helps to prevent the layers of fabric from moving, shifting apart, and preventing little tucks in your fabric from happening. If you use a regular presser foot, you are going to have problems. Your fabric will shift and you will get some little pin tucks in there. So this is what it looks like. This little piece right here goes over the screw that holds the needle in your sewing machine. always test your stitches out. For the most part, when you're doing quilting stitches, you want to make sure that you change your stitch length to 3.0 because you are stitching through a lot of layers of fabric. If you use too small a stitch and you try to remove those stitches, it's a mess. So make sure you use a 3.0 stitch length. Now, if you don't have a walking presser foot, go to your local sewing machine store. They can probably order one for you, and you can even purchase them online. If you have never done quilting stitches before and you want more detailed information on how to do it, check for the link below your YouTube screen, which will show you how to do more types of quilting stitches, what kind of threads to use, and how to manipulate your fabric to get it to go through the sewing machine more easily. Now I'm going to show you how to trim the excess fabric off of your edges. So here's the quilt top. We want to trim this off. So place your cutting ruler along the edge of your quilt top and go around to all 4 sides and trim your excess fabric off. Your last step is to put the binding on the edges. For this size of quilt, I cut out 5 binding strips that were 2.5 inches wide by 42 inches. Make sure you cut those selvage ends off of your strips, then stitch those strips together, press your seams open, and then fold and press the strips in half. Now, if you do not know how to put binding strips on your quilt, check below your YouTube screen for that video link to show you how to put this on. I really enjoyed making this quilt because it's so quick to make. Now, make sure you follow me on Instagram and check out my Facebook page. Thanks for watching. See you next time, and happy sewing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please click on the thumbs up button. And don't forget to click on share to share this video with your friends. If you haven't subscribed yet, click on that red subscribe button down there in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Click on the bell so you can receive notifications about my latest videos. I'm Cheryl, and this is Scotty, and this is Manny. See you next time, and happy sewing!